Welcome to Josh's Worst Nightmare Oddcast, presented by Denver Horror Collective. I'm your host, author Josh Schlossberg, surveying the dark landscape of biological horror fiction. For this episode, we're being possessed by Daemon Manx. Daemon Manx is an American speculative horror author who has been featured in magazines in both the US and the UK. He is a Splatterpunk Award nominee, and in 2021 he received a Horror Authors Guild Award for his story, The Dead Girl. In 2021, Daemon opened Last Waltz Publishing, an indie horror label focused on undiscovered voices and elevating new authors. Welcome to my nightmare, Daemon.
Thanks for having me, Josh. It's great to be on this show. I'm a big fan.
Well, I'm psyched that you are here, and I've been following your stuff for quite some time. And so folks know, on Josh's Worst Nightmare, I invite on horror authors to talk about an aspect of biological horror, which I define as living creatures and vital processes, in some way relevant to their writing. This episode, we're going to talk about parasites. Now, scientifically, which is only a small part of what I care about, a parasite is an organism that lives on or in a host organism and gets its food from or at the expense of its host. And there's different versions of that, including supernatural. So why are we talking about this topic? What's the interest to you? How is this relevant to your world?
All right. So, well, first of all, nothing terrifies me more than something that can actually live on or inside of me that I have no control over. Like, that is very Kafka terrifying to me. Also, for the last 4 years, I've been writing, rewriting, editing, throwing out, and rewriting again a 4-book series that I hope to have out next year, which has to do with a certain supernatural parasite. Also very biological and very natural. I don't want to give away too much, but it's very oh it's it's hard to describe without sitting down and giving the whole bullet list thing. But a supernatural paranormal parasite that has the ability to change the DNA of its hosts.
Nice.
Yeah,
Nice.
so that's something I've been working on. And I've also been lucky enough to be included in certain books like Hacked in Two with James Carlson, where he wrote about an age-old tick that's very vampiric, which, if we look at ticks, they're very vampiric, something that lives off of our blood. So I just find that fascinating, and I know nothing about anything. I'm the pantser who flies by the seat of his pants at all times. And I'm just like, hey, parasites, I'd love to talk about them. Know nothing about them, but I like to talk.
Well, I think that actually can ironically be better. I think so. A lot of my background has been in some journalism and some science writing. I'm certainly not a scientist. I'm more of a creative writer, and I think more like you, but I've done some of the research. Sometimes I can actually bog down the writing because, like, all right, well, I have to get this scientific. Horror is not about that. It's about the feeling you get around it. And yeah, I would actually encourage you not to do a bunch more research on the details of anything, because just go with what feels right. Go with your gut on that, and it'll turn out awesome. And that's what horror brings to it, right? Because obviously there are the biological parasites like ticks, and my listeners know I have a thing about ticks, but the supernatural component is, in a sense, so demons or any possession thing. So anything to do with the exorcist, whatnot, that's a parasite. It is sucking out the lifeblood, if not literally, maybe spiritually. And that, to me, there's so much that's interesting about that. And it's also symbolic in a way, right? Like something that's just, there's a lot in our life that is sucking our lifeblood, whether it's aspects of politics and ideology or just how shitty people are to one another or whatever. So do you have like some parable aspect behind it, or just like, no, that scares me and I'm writing about it, end of story?
You know what? So I was raised in an Italian, very Catholic upbringing. So there's a strong sense of good and evil that's in the upbringing. I'm now I don't know what I am. I'm a horror author. But this was my upbringing, and with that, we're taught that, possession is a real thing. Like this is not just in the metaphysical sense, like the devil gets inside you and controls you, and because my upbringing, my faith, they want to scare you with fire and brimstone right from the get-go. So, we've got a lot of traumatized kids who walking around still all messed up from that upbringing. And, I remember seeing The Exorcist, and all of my fears are now confirmed as a young man. And this stuff never leaves me.
Yeah.
I've had an experience as a child with a Ouija board,
Hmm.
which I could get into too. But to this day, I don't touch those things just because of the possibility of welcoming something in that can latch onto me in the spiritual sense, into
Hmm.
that ether part of us. Yeah, when I was 10 years old, I was coming home right before it was sundown, and the girls next door were on their front lawn playing with a Ouija board.
Yeah.
And I went over there, and they're like, sit down. And they start asking, like, the questions are getting worse and they're getting worse. And then they ask, when is he going to die? And the thing spells out 40. Now, I didn't die when I was 40, but up until I turned 40, it was never left my mind, So I was always walking around like, oh man, I got another year left. I better make it count. So that can mess you up.
Yeah. It's funny. If somebody asked me, do I believe in ghosts? I would say no. I'm open to the possibility. I just haven't experienced it. But if they say, do you want to play with a Ouija board? I will also say no. So
Yeah.
there's some cognitive dissonance there where I say I don't believe in ghosts. And I'm like, I'm not touching that ghost machine. Thank you. No.
Yeah, I don't know exactly what I believe in, but I know there's things that I can't explain. So,
Well, the parasite, I would say, in terms of a Ouija board for me, might be, and maybe it's the case for you also, is just a thought gets inside my head and then I'm overthinking about it and I'm ruminating on it. So, in a sense, that's a parasitical thought, right? I might die when I'm 40. This board told me that you were being preyed on by that parasite in a sense. And a lot of thoughts can be like that.
yeah, and I would say it definitely added some sort of stress along those years living up to it. Like there was always this gnawing feeling like, oh no, what's going to happen? You know,
I'm glad you made it. And so that's,
so am I.
yeah, that is a really mean thing to do to somebody because yeah, you could say that to anybody. Oh, you're going to die, blah, blah, blah. And like, whatever. And then it's like, will I? And so that is, it was doing what a parasite does is it stresses the body. So there are lots of versions of that spiritual, mental, physical. Parasite is a frightening thing. And we do consider people we don't care for in society a lot of times to be parasites. Oh, they're just sucking the lifeblood of the system. Obviously, sometimes that's pretty unfair assessment, but that concept of taking and you're not giving back. There are things like you know what a remora is? That little fish that sucks onto a
Sure.
shark. Now that's not a parasite. It's mutualism. Like they benefit each other. The shark is like the transportation for it and it eats the sea lice or whatever. So they help one another. So that ain't parasite. A lot of people will look at that and see it. But then there's that, you've probably seen the photo. There's like whatever that fish is that has that like weird beetle or beetle crab thing in its tongue. Have you seen that? Like in the place of its tongue?
I haven't seen that.
Oh, well,
No.
you're lucky. Don't look it up. It's actually disturbing. But basically, it's this fish and it has a creature that's inside of its mouth. And that is parasitical because it takes the food away. So
Mm,
it's a freeloader. I was gonna say it's leeching off. It's like, yeah, it's literally a leech. It doesn't have any benefit to the animal. That being said, understanding ecology, everything does have a place in ecology. So there is a benefit to parasites in nature, which may be just knocking out some of the herd, right? So have you ever thought of a parasite in a positive way?
Well, yeah, I mean, I think there's parasites that are living in us all the time, eating the dead skin cells, eating the bacteria in our stomachs,
That's positive.
so that is a symbiotic relationship right there.
Symbiotic, right?
So yeah, I guess, yeah, that but still when I think about it, I'm like, ooh, they're
It's
on
yeah,
me, they're on me,
it's an unpleasant thing. It's something
Yeah.
inside of us. But yeah, so here it is. It's the inside the Atlantic croaker. It's a parasite, a tongue-eating louse is found in a variety of fish and ecosystems. And yeah, it's just creepy looking. It looks like a little alien, like from Aliens. And so that's lots of fun. But just real quick, just for the sake of it, so looking about parasites, there's three different components, and this might inspire people, or it will be too nerdy for them. But so there's protozoa, that's a parasite. So that's the one-celled organism. So that can be things like giardia. So that's if you drink beaver shit in your water, that gives you the runs. So that's why you got to filter your water in the forest. So that is a kind of parasite. Then there's a helminths, and those are larger, visible to the eye. So like a flatworm and other worms that go into your body. So the worms are the helminths. And then there is ectoparasites, and those are the bloodsuckers like mosquitoes and ticks. And yeah, so like my thing with ticks, I used to live in the Northeast, and that is like tick central. And like I'm in the woods a lot. And so like I was always thinking about Lyme disease, and I hate things that are so fucking small you can't see. Like I am like my fear of bears, snakes, even sharks is less than because you can see them coming. In theory, you can fight them off. At least here's the thing, when you get in your car at the end of a hike, you're like, the bear didn't eat me, it's over. But the ticks, you're like, it could be on me, in me, whatever. So does that disturb you at all, or what?
Yeah, totally. Well, I live here in New Jersey in a very wooded area, and the deer are always in my backyard.
Yep.
And that we got to watch out for the animals, and ticks definitely freak me out. Like I am covered when I go in the woods. I don't want a bug on me sucking my blood. I don't like mosquitoes. I
Hmm.
don't know if anybody really says, "Hey, yeah, I love mosquitoes." But I've
Right.
got lakes all around here. There's so many of those critters, and sometimes you'll see like a deer come out who does
Mm-hmm.
not look good,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
he's got them all over him, covering him. And these things get huge, like this. The top of this microphone, you'll see a tick that is that engorged on the blood of a deer. It,
Yes.
if that doesn't scare you, I don't know what will. Like you're as cool as ice, man. And that lice thing, that is not a that is not. That's why I shave my head. I don't want lice.
Yeah, well, that's not why I shave my head,
you
but it's
know.
definitely a benefit.
Yeah, me
It's
either.
it's a benefit for it. Yeah. Well, the tick stuff, I've done a whole episode on ticks. I actually wrote a whole novel about it. I was never able to find a publisher for it actually. But um a lot of the times the ticks latch onto the deer that already have something like chronic wasting disease. It's a disease that's really knocking out a lot of deer. So that's the other thing about the parasites. They'll just attach themselves to healthy people and make them unhealthy, but they'll also go for the unhealthy and really just drain them dry. It's definitely vampiric. I also wrote a, a story about bed bugs and tie into vampires. Luckily, bed bugs are harmless. Actually, we hate them because they come in our house, but they're actually harmless, unlike certain ticks. So it's the deer tick. So the deer tick is a teeny one, like sesame seed or smaller poppy seed, actually. And those can carry Lyme disease. The dog ticks, so like the bigger ones that you can see that blowed up, those rarely have those don't have Lyme disease. Sometimes they can have some other stuff, but yeah, I don't have a problem with the insects themselves. I've gotten dog ticks. I'm like, oh, that's interesting, but it's the deer tick, and I have the worst infestation I ever saw actually was in New Jersey because my grandparents lived in South Jersey, and I went for a hike one time in sort of some pine barrensy thing, and there was like a rock on the ground, and it looked like the rock was crawling. I was like, holy shit! It was just like furred with these tiny,
Wow.
tiny ticks. And I was like, I don't care for that. So
No, that's scary.
yeah, ticks are not cool because they carry disease. So that's,
Yeah.
there's the disease carrying ones. Then there's, so mosquitoes, I don't actually mind mosquitoes. They don't actually usually suck on me that much. Maybe you have sweeter blood, but they don't usually bother me that much. Um, but they also obviously can carry disease too. So that's the added horror of it all.
Yeah. So, I would think, what is it? The dogs get the heartworm from the mosquito.
Oh, okay.
Um,
Yeah, that's
so
nasty.
now you've got these worms that are burrowing into the muscle of your heart. It happens in dogs and cats, but
That's scary.
that's scary. And all those different worms that the tapeworm. Ooh.
Right. Tapeworm is a perfect parasite, classic parasite.
And so in this series that I've been working on, not only is it something that feeds on the host physically, but it's also of a spiritual nature, uh, essentially original evil. So it's got to tie in with that. And of course, there is a one of the main characters, one of the host of main characters is a Catholic priest.
Nice.
So there's that whole good and evil battle going on, as well as, you know, now you've got so many people infected by a parasite that actually alters them. So,
That's a frightening predicament. Yeah, that sounds really really interesting. So yeah, looking forward to that coming out there. But speaking of books, there are a bunch out there with parasites, but one that really struck me was something called Clamp, and it's written by a guy named Peter K.K. Williams. So I don't want to give it away, although it's funny. They don't tell you what it is until later in the story, but the cover actually is the spoiler. So I'll just spoil it because it's on the cover anyway. But it's yeah, it's like they put it on the cover. And anyway, so it takes place in Lake Champlain in Vermont. So I used to live near there, and it's basically the sixth Great Lake, and it's huge and it's beautiful in freshwater, so you don't have to worry about other creatures. But it's something that appears in that lake in the book, and it is parasitical. And I thought he did a really cool job with that. So if you want to read some parasite horror fiction, Clamp by Peter K.K. Williams, yeah, that would probably be my top pick.
I think I can imagine the parasite they're talking about. That,
Probably.
yeah, I've heard that, and that is terrifying.
Yeah, it's I think it's always about the things that go inside of us versus the things on the outside of us. We don't want things inside of us, or we have an instinctual fear of that. And the external creatures, you can still fight them, and you can track them. You can see them with your eye. And that for me is the real difference. That's why things like bacteria, viruses, whatever, to me, that's more alarming than like a terrorist, you know?
Now, recently they have that. I don't know if you have been watching HBO's The Last of Us at
No.
all. So it's based on a video game, and the premise is, I'm going to get the name wrong, but there's a fungus that takes over insects. It grows inside the
Oh yeah.
insect, it kills them, but continues to move the body, and it infects others. It's a But it can only live inside a host that's below 94 degrees. That's why it does not uh, move on to humans. Well, now, with global warming, the the premise of this story is this fungus has adapted and it makes the jump to humans.
That
And that's the zombie of
right.
the future. Yeah.
Yeah, that's Cordyceps. So I've actually
Gorgeous.
done, of course, I've done podcasts on that. It's come up a lot of time. Yeah, that's a common. That's definitely not the first time that's been used in horror fiction. But yeah, it's the zombie fungus, and it makes ants do their bidding. And some of it's like they climb to the top of a leaf, and then it sprouts out of their head, and it takes over the brain, and that's a creepy thing, man. That is a creepy thing. So yeah, the idea of it jumping over to humans, that's been done before, but that sounds cool that they did that in that story. That's appealing to me. I mean,
Yeah, it's pretty neat. They've got these great special effects, and you see humans with these cordyceps growing out of them and just mutating their whole face and head into like a mushroom like fungus. It's really creepy.
and so would you consider a vampire as a parasite, right? Would that count, would you say?
Yeah, well, I think anything that lives off of our blood definitely
Yeah.
classifies as a parasite. And I'm wondering if the vampire myth or whatever it was that started spawning that is actually born from some type of parasite that happened back then.
Right. Yeah, it's also thought definitely disease born. I guess some theories are maybe tuberculosis or some other disease. But yeah, I mean, the appearance of somebody pale, drawn, and the sucking the life, whether it's the vampire itself or the victim of the vampire, either of that can come from disease. So you say, oh, well, it's they didn't know what disease was back then. So they're like, all right, we got to attribute a supernatural cause to it. But who knows? Maybe vampires actually are real. I don't. I leave a at least a 0.01% chance that any of these things are real. Elves, Bigfoot, vampires. If I had to bet on it, I would say no. But if anyone ever's like, I can tell you for without a doubt, and I'd stake my life on it that there aren't these things and they don't exist. It's like, well, how the hell do you know? like.
Yeah, for sure. Uh, when I actually put my foot down and say what I believe and what I don't believe, I'm always reminded what somebody once told me, and they said, "What you believe and what you know are two entirely different things."
Right on.
And it's, yeah, man, I don't know for sure. So, but I've got my beliefs. Sometimes they're stronger than others, but I got to leave that 0.1 myself because I don't
Mhm.
know.
I mean, we're entitled to our beliefs and we have to act upon things in life. If we're just like, oh, I don't know, all the time, we have to take a path. But yeah, I think the route out of at least the world's insanity these days is kind of like, well, I'm pretty sure I'm right, but maybe I am wrong. I'm going to leave that little margin. And when you do that, you're like, well, I'm not going to kill this guy over this thing because maybe I'm wrong. It gives you a little bit of humility. But yeah, I have my strong beliefs as well. We all do. But I wonder, so how much you said that the religious aspect tied a lot into your parasite that you're writing, that good and evil. So would you feel like that's really a central component in that for you?
That the idea of a spiritual parasite, it was very strong in the inspiration of this because going back to it, something has spawned the myths of vampires. Something happened before the first vampire story because Stoker isn't even the first guy to write about something like a
Oh,
vampire. Like this goes back to Egypt and even beforehand,
right.
every civilization has a story about a parasitic creature that latches onto the host.
Yep. Yep.
Um, so yeah, that's a huge component. And I wanted to write about a creature that was actually the original, the originator of every horror myth.
I love it.
whether it be the zombie or the werewolf or the
Yep.
vampire. Well, yeah. And what was it? Well, it's original evil. That's what it was, you know. So without giving away too much, it's a 4-book series, so I couldn't give away the whole thing, but
Yeah.
it all had to start somewhere.
Yeah, I love that idea, and I think these ideas do start from a germ like that, whether it's a mental, spiritual, psychological germ, and I wonder if a lot of the parasite fear, it's symbolic of, I mean, it's based on some real life biological components, but also the symbolism of society can only hold together when t- it's people giving back to one another, right? And so if there and there's room for, maybe the people who are having a really hard time, like I wouldn't consider that parasitical, or some people might, but there are people having a hard time. And so look, we got a little bit of surplus. That's cool. Then there are people who are deliberately like, I just want to take and take and take and take. I'm not interested in giving back at all. I'm doing fine, but I want more. I wonder if that's just some fear of society falling apart, because if you have too many of those folks who are just taken without giving back, it all falls apart for everyone. And that's the irony of a lot of these parasites, is like they kill off their host, they die too. So they got to not bleed it too hard. So what do you think about that BS theory I just came up with on the spot?
Yeah, well, I think that's you've got to if you're assigning logic to the parasite, then that they will have that intention. But I mean, nature has a design. Nature is pretty intelligent.
Yeah,
Um, you know, ticks haven't killed off every deer and every living thing in the woods,
that's
so
right. That's right.
there is a thought process going on in nature. They're not like a human that will just rape the land and take everything from it until the soil cannot grow anymore.
Mm-hmm.
I would say nature is a lot more precise in what it does and holds back a lot. I think you've got a very good point there.
But yeah, I think you're totally right about nature. Nature knows what it's doing. I've always believed that. And that's kind of the heart of this podcast, is looking at elements of nature. And maybe some of them are scary, but they're probably there for a reason, and leaving some trust in that. At the same time, sorry, deer ticks, I'm going to still avoid you, whether you're it's part of the plan or not. I'm not going to let them make me the preyed upon, although it may inevitably happen. But anyway, I think this was really fun conversation. I think this is a great topic. I'm excited for your book series. So remind folks where they can find some of your work.
Well, like everybody else, my stuff is all over Amazon, and everything I put out is also available in Kindle Unlimited. So if you're a member of Kindle Unlimited, go get that thing for free. Daemon Manx, go to Amazon, type in that name, DAEMONMANX. Also, you could check me out at my own website, which is www.daemonmanx.com. And you can check me out at my publishing house, which is Last Waltz Publishing. And our website is www.lastwaltzpublishing.com. You can also get signed copies of all our books there at the publishing house.
Excellent. Beautiful. Well, thank you so much, Damon.
Thanks so much for having me. I had a blast. I could talk about this stuff for hours.
Awesome. Thanks for taking a trip with me through Josh's Worst Nightmare, where I, Josh Schlossberg, survey the dark landscape of biological horror fiction presented by Denver Horror Collective. If you don't want to miss any of the great, and sometimes disturbing, weekly episodes I've got planned for you, be sure to subscribe to Josh's Worst Nightmare on a variety of podcast platforms. You can also sign up for Josh's Worst Nightmare e-newsletter at joshsworstnightmare.com, where I share a whole squirming mess of bio-horror, including my infamous haiku horror reviews and my latest dark scribblings. Speaking of which, if you haven't already picked up a copy of my cosmic biological folk horror novella, Maline, from D&T Publishing, you can find a copy of the paperback hardcover, or ebook at Amazon, godless.com, or joshsworstnightmare.com. Yours darkly, Josh Schlossberg.